I'm Kelly Egiga, and we're live from our studios here in Lagos, Nigeria. We're tracking stories from all around the world, and we begin with the war in the Middle East, where we understand U.S. Secretary of State Mr. Anthony Blinken has held talks with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah as part of a sixth urgent tour of the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas war began last October. Mr. Blinken believes a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas is very much possible as gaps are narrowing in their continuing negotiations. The two leaders also discussed a plan that would normalize relations between Riyadh and Israel. In the meantime, the U.S. Secretary of State is now in Egypt, where he's just met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and two other government officials in Cairo. This trip is Blinken's latest bid to compel Israel to ease its assault on Gaza and outline a post-conflict plan that could lead to a Palestinian state. His visit comes ahead of a planned trip to Israel on Friday, that's tomorrow, where he will discuss ongoing negotiations to secure the release of all hostages, the Israeli military's planned Rafah offensive, and the need to dramatically increase and sustain the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And in Gaza, Israeli forces are continuing attacks on homes near Al-Shifa Hospital. Officials say forces are preventing ambulances or civil defense crew from reaching those who are injured. The Israeli army, in a statement, revealed that it killed more than 50 fighters during exchanges of fire at the hospital, and that it has located weapons and infrastructure at the facility. Hamas has previously rejected similar claims, saying no fighters were present at the hospital and that it is not used as a base. Meanwhile, the Israeli army also adds that it killed 20 fighters in a precise airstrike in central Gaza without specifying the exact location. And so far, at least 31,988 Palestinians have been killed and 74,188 others have been injured since the attack, according to health officials in Gaza. And staying with the war, the UN and EU are calling for more humanitarian corridor opening to allow for the safe inflow of aid into Gaza. UN Chief Antonio Guterres and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen let out their voices at the EU leaders meeting holding in Brussels.
We are also very concerned about the risks a full-scale offensive in Rafah would have on the vulnerable civilian population. This needs to be avoided by all costs. In the meantime, we do everything we can to channel more aid to Gaza. We allocated an additional 125 million euros for humanitarian aid for Palestinians in 2024. Out of this total, 81 million has already been contracted to key UN partners, such as the World Food Programme, WHO, and UNICEF. The flow of aid by land is too slow. So we call for the opening of more land crossings while we further develop alternatives. For example, the airdrops, and of course through the maritime corridor we opened from Cyprus. And I'm very glad that after Open Arms' successful operation was completed, but now of course we need to see many more such ships and deliveries in the maritime corridor to Gaza. But of course we must also continue to focus the actual delivery of aid to Palestinians on the ground. We have seen the images of food distribution among stampede and chaos, so we must work on safe delivery of aid. While we address the emergency of the crisis, we must also prepare for the day after. Europe will support recovery and reconstruction as soon as conditions allow, and we need to build a clear political path towards a two-state solution.
Nothing justifies the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Today, more than half of the population, over 1 million people, are facing catastrophic hunger, according to the scientific classification that was recently published. And so we must act now before it is too late. I call on the Israeli authorities to ensure complete and unfettered access for humanitarian goods throughout Gaza and for the international community to fully support our humanitarian efforts.
Well, let's bring you more updates from the United Nations. This time, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, is again sounding the alarm on the impending famine in the Gaza Strip. He notes that starvation, malnutrition, and dehydration in the besieged enclave can be avoided, indicating that the need for a ceasefire is needed now more than ever before.
The projected imminent famine in Gaza can and must be prevented. Israel's now 16-year-old blockade of Gaza has already had a severe impact on human rights for the civilian population, leaving the local economy devastated and creating a dependence on aid. The extent of Israel's continued restrictions on the entry of aid into Gaza, together with the manner in which it continues to conduct hostilities, may amount to the use of starvation as a method of war, which is a war crime. The clock is ticking. Everyone, especially those with influence, must insist that Israel acts to facilitate the unimpeded entry and distribution of needed humanitarian assistance to end starvation and avert all risk of famine. There needs to be an immediate ceasefire as well as the unconditional release of hostages still held in Gaza.
So, there's so much to unpack around the war, and so let's get some insights and analysis now. Acting Head of Department, Public Law, Faculty of Law, Prime University in Abuja. He joins us live on the program from the core city in Enugu. Thank you indeed, Mr. Chukwuemeka Eze, for agreeing to speak with us here on Channels TV. I mean, U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Anthony Blinken, has a whole lot on his plate with his latest trip to the Middle East. He's met with the Saudi prince, we understand, and of course we also understand that he's also just met with the Egyptian president as well, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and he's expected in Israel tomorrow, Friday. He has done these rounds before, so what do you think could be achieved this time?
Yes, I believe that a lot will be achieved this time, because definitely the meeting with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, of Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, this is definitely significant, and it's coming at the same time when Anthony Blinken, the United States, has submitted a draft resolution for immediate ceasefire to the United Nations Security Council. So the happening of events, all these events at the same time, submission of draft resolution, going to Saudi Arabia, coming to Egypt, proposing to be in Israel tomorrow, and just the beginning of Ramadan is to prevent a cataclysmic movement into Rafah by the Israeli Defense Forces. So everything will need to be done fast enough to ensure that humanitarian aid flows into Gaza. And Anthony Blinken knows that he has no time in his hands. The Arab countries are becoming uncomfortable. The United Nations is uncomfortable. The European Commission, European Union leaders, in fact, they are meeting and they are hell-bent on taking a definite position against Israel. Canada has stopped exporting arms to Israel. So a lot of things are happening. And even within the US, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, is not having it going well with Bibi, that's the Israeli Prime Minister. There is no longer bipartisan support for Israel in United States of America. So that's why Anthony Blinken just have to succeed now or never.
Yes, and so when you look at the position of the White House, And of course, you have just mentioned Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Senate. So do you think the U.S. is absolutely clear about its expectations for that region when talking about the Middle East?
Yes, the U.S. is clear about it because it has gotten some guarantees. Before it decided to send a draft resolution to the UN Security Council and asking for immediate ceasefire. You recall that the U.S. has been reluctant in asking for immediate ceasefire between the parties without return of the hostages as previous draft resolutions by the Arab countries, that dimension that the Arab countries have taken. The change there now is that the ceasefire is linked to the release of the hostages. So if this is carried and the hostages, if there is hope that they will be released, definitely for the first time there will be immediate. The word immediate had been resisted in the past by the US, but it has allowed that. That's an improvement, that with immediate ceasefire there is hope that other issues around the war will be resolved. So I think the United States is taking a more progressive approach to the matter now, especially now that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be losing ground in support, even in traditional allied countries that have been supporting Israel.
Mr. Isay, Mr. Blinken says the U.S. has circulated a draft UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. That's part of why he's in the Middle East. The release of hostages is top of that particular resolution. So we know those UN resolutions don't have much impact, but Mr. Blinken seems to believe in them so much. Do you believe in them?
No, why it has not had impact is that it has always been vetoed by the United States of America. Now that the US has actually submitted this resolution, if it is not vetoed by any of the 5 veto-wielding powers, then definitely it will have impact, because under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter of 1945, the United Nations Security Council has been given the power to ensure law and order in the world. So I don't agree that it doesn't have much impact, because once it is adopted and not vetoed, especially by the 5 veto-wielding countries, definitely it will be binding on all countries all over the world, and Israel will have no choice than to comply. Therefore, that means that the invasion of Rafah will be a distant thing, it will be a remote thing, and it will give countries more capacity, more ability to penetrate into many parts of Gaza to supply aid, and equally look for more routes, even beyond the land route, and consider the maritime route to ensure that more aid enters Gaza. And once there is no more further attack, especially into Rafah, and there is immediate ceasefire, more aid goes to the Gazans, then rebuilding of Gaza, talks for rebuilding of Gaza will be initiated, and far flung, the 2-state solution will be on the cards. But first things first, the hostages have to be released, and the Gaza will need to be at peace. But with the current attack on our Al-Shifa hospital, it seems that the day of the daggers is not quite over. All right. It's not yet to Huru.
Yes. Let's see how we can touch other areas as well. When you look at what is playing out in Gaza, international media seems to be a bit divided. How would you describe the situation in the Middle East, Gaza precisely? Is it a war, a conflict, or a genocide?
The International Court of Justice has given a ruling, and that ruling says it is not a genocide. So we have to stand upon that until there is a counter ruling to that effect. So number one, it is not a genocide. Number two, it is a conflict and it is a war. All the ingredients of war are existing currently in this conflict. Conflict is a wider term than war. So because anything can be any fact of disagreement or attack and counter-attack can amount to a conflict. But this is a war. It is bound by the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949. So 4 Geneva Conventions, all the rules, all the laws of war, even the 1930 Hague Convention, I hope I'm right, or 1898 Convention, 1907 Convention on the Laws of War, they're all applicable to what is happening in the Middle East. So it is a war. In one respect.
All right.
On the other hand, it is a conflict, but certainly not a genocide. We'll get to the point of genocide when perhaps the ICJ takes another look at it.
All right, Ms. Isay, we will discuss about the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, in just a moment, and Mr. Blinken's visit in Israel in just a moment. But let's go down a bit memory lane. The history of the Israeli and Palestinian conflicts or war traces back to the 19th century. So when you consider this historical background, what would you describe as perhaps the missing link?
It goes beyond the 19th or 18th centuries. The war had been on even from the 7th century, when the Orthodox Greek Archbishop handed over the key of Jerusalem to the Arabian attackers. The war had always been there, even in 1517, when what we call Turkey now attacked the then Jerusalem. They occupied Jerusalem from 1517 to 1917, a period of 400 years. It was because Turkey supported Germany in the First World War, and Germany lost the war that brought about the League of Nations, making Transjordan and Palestine trust territories, handed over Transjordan and Palestine to Britain, and handed over what we call currently Syria and Iraq, handed it over to France. Lebanon is Syria. Lebanon and Syria were handed over to France. Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine were handed over to Britain. So with that handover, the mandate was managed by Britain up to 1947, when the matter was, remember the Balfour Declaration, the then foreign minister of Britain called Lord Balfour. He made a declaration which showed that the United Kingdom was ready to allow the two sides, the Arabs and the Jews, to stay on their own. So basically 1947 partition resolution of the United Nations presented before the two sides the capacity to stay on their own, but the Palestinians refused, causing Israel to declare independence, I think around May 14, 1948, and there was a war between the Israelis and the Arabs. They did that war. At the end, Israel won. Then 1967, we had the 6-day war, which Israel won. 1973, the Yom Kippur War, which eventually forced Anwar Sadat, the then president of Egypt, to visit Israel for a truce, for peace, when Israel was under Menachem Begin. So there was a peace agreement. That was the commencement Anwar Sadat was eventually assassinated because of that. Eventually, in the 1990s, Jordan entered into a peace agreement with Israel, and it had continued that way until 2005, when Hamas actually came into the scene and ruptured the whole environment. Since then, in 2007, Hamas took over Gaza, and life had never been the same again. So up to today, Israel and Palestine have been on a ding-dong affair, and we hope that one day this thing will come to an end.
Absolutely. We have to all keep hope alive, and of course we're looking forward to that all-important visit to Tel Aviv by the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken, who of course will be meeting with the Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, in Tel Aviv, Israel. And we hope that indeed the dire conditions, as we can see in Gaza, will perhaps be brought to an end. We understand famine is in the picture between now and May, according to reports by the United Nations, and so we hope that indeed this dire situation can come to an end. But we must thank you most kindly for this historical perspective and analysis. Acting Head of Department, Public Law, Faculty of Law, Prime University in Abuja, Mr. Chukwuemeka Eze, who has joined us live from Enugu State. Thank you indeed for your thoughts and perspective.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful.